What would you do if your neighbor, who's been asking you for help, died years ago? There's something unsettling about living alone for the first time. I learned that the hard way when I moved into my first apartment, a small, rundown place in a quiet neighborhood. It wasn't much, but it was all I could afford as a college student. The building itself was old, with creaky floors and dimly lit hallways. My neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Holloway, lived directly across from me. She was kind, but strange. I never actually saw her leave her apartment. One day I found a note slipped under my door. It was handwritten in shaky letters. "Could you pick up some milk for me? I can't go out today. Mrs. Holloway." I thought it was odd, but decided to help. I left the milk outside her door, knocked, and walked away. When I checked later, it was gone, and another note was waiting for me. "Thank you so much, you're very kind." This became a routine. Once or twice a week, she'd leave a note asking for groceries or small favors. I never saw her in person, but I didn't think much of it. Maybe she was just shy or unwell. One night, I was studying when I heard voices arguing in the hallway. It sounded like Mrs. Holloway and someone else, a man. But by the time I opened my door, the hallway was empty. The next morning, I found another note. "Thank you for everything, and I'm sorry you had to hear that. Mrs. Holloway." A few days later, the landlord stopped by to fix my heater. As we chatted, I casually mentioned Mrs. Holloway. He froze and looked at me like I'd said something insane. "Mrs. Holloway?" he asked. "That unit's been vacant for 2 years. She passed away." I laughed nervously, thinking it was a mistake, but he insisted. "She died in her apartment. It was unusual. No one's lived there since." I didn't know what to believe. That night I stared at her door for hours, trying to make sense of it. It was dusty, the lock rusted, like it hadn't been touched in years. When I got back to my apartment, there was a final note waiting for me. "I'll miss you, Mrs. Holloway." I never found out what really happened to Mrs. Holloway or who or what had been leaving me those notes. But sometimes, late at night, I think I hear footsteps in the hallway, stopping just outside my door.